what I'm going to do is really look at the problem. So here is, I'm sure a few of you have seen this gentleman, and I'm just going to read this, a very apt quote. There's a lot of talk about hacking computers and bank accounts. We are entering an era of hacking humans. New technology and knowledge gives us the ability to hack humans, which means to predict their choices, to understand their feelings, to manipulate them, and also to replace them. Now that should be quite chilling. Now this gentleman is a consultant to the WEF, and these people really think that they can dictate our lives. And what we're seeing now is an effect on a day-to-day basis from that. Now what I'm going to do in the next slide is show you a very simple way that our brain can be hacked. And this is a visual hack. So once they understand how the brain processes information, they can actually design things to then bypass that processing. So the question is, are the squares A and B, what I'm going to do is really look at, are the squares A and B the same color? Okay, and as you notice, they are actually the same color. But because there's a shadow next to the green thing, our brain colors the B into a lighter color. And that's one way that we can be hacked. Now, with junk food, it's being hacked so it tastes like real food. Advertising creates positive emotions. So there's so many different ways that perception can be hacked so we don't see things how they actually are. Now, here is a very chilling study around authority. Now, Cialdini in his book said this was the most scary study that he had seen. So there's a group of nurses, and they had a person, an actor, phone up the nurses, and they had set this up in advance, and they phoned them up, and the actor pretended to be a doctor. And then the question was, what percentage of nurses would administer a drug under these conditions? Number one, the prescription was transmitted over the phone, violating hospital policy. Number two, the drug, which was a fake drug, was fictitious and not approved for use. Number three, the dosage, because they actually put these bottles in the nursing station, was actually twice the maximum daily dose printed on the medication. And finally, the nurse had never met or spoken to this physician before. Now, when we look at the options here, any of these options is a disaster. But when you think about the actual number of nurses that willingly went and administered this drug, it's actually 95%. And that's quite startling. So what you have, and it would understand why so much of the last 5 years happened, is that a lot of people are just following authority. They're just doing as they're told. And obviously history has told us a lot about that. But a lot of these studies really reveal what people would actually do in these situations. What they say they would do, that prediction is usually far off from reality. And most people are familiar with Milgram's study, but Milgram surveyed the experts before, and they estimated that 1 in 1,000 people would push that button to harm another person because someone in a white coat told them to do so. It actually turned out to be close to 70%. So that is a hidden variable that now presents itself, that once we understand, we start to see the problem much clearer. And from there, I'm actually now going to pass over to Dr. David Funder for the vision.
Thank you, David. Can everyone see me? Dan, I'm on the screen, all right? Yep. Okay. Yep. All right. So I'd like to say, first of all, that it's a great pleasure to be at this workshop. I feel privileged to be part of this thinking society. I'd like to thank Dan and the Elevate Group for hosting this event. And Sinead for really sort of reaching out and helping to coordinate this. I'm a political philosopher, so I come at this from a kind of a political and philosophical perspective, looking at the big picture and the institutional backdrop to the problems that we're confronting. The other day, I read about the arrest in November 2023 of a retired special constable by Kent Police based on something he tweeted, warning about the rise of anti-Semitism. One of the investigating officers was apparently recorded muttering very Brexity things in relation to literature in his home. And for me, this is just one more confirmation of the need for a workshop on critical thinking. If you're in this webinar, there's a good chance you've already started to sense structures of overbearing control in your society. David and Sinead will focus a lot on how we can free our mind from various forms of propaganda and behavioral conditioning. I will be providing a broader systemic perspective on this conditioning by uncovering the enslaving effects of a centralized state on our lives and how that enslavement is supported by a particular narrative, and a very seductive narrative. And in addition, I will be offering you a more empowering story about how we build a free and flourishing society together based on my book, The Polycentric Republic, a theory of civil order for free and diverse societies. Because the stories we tell ourselves about our society and about our communities are dispositive, are decisive for how we live our lives and what we aspire to. And I'm hoping that maybe in the course of this workshop, as I talk about the narrative of the centralized state, that will become clearer. Now, in a nutshell, this is just a little sneak preview. The Polycentric Republic represents a shift away from top-down hierarchical social engineering models of order to bottom-up horizontal cooperation. So instead of a national state, think of a league of independent cities with far-reaching freedom of association. Or think of the difference between a tightly structured command and control military outfit and a local farmers market or jazz festival. In one case, you have coercion, tight hierarchical control, and that, for ordinary social activities, kills initiative and it kills trusting relationships. Loose, horizontal relations, guided by a broad framework of norms and values, which is what we need to get to, enable creativity and adaptation. And of course, they enable freedom. So in this workshop, I'll be focusing on how to move towards a more vibrant and liberating social order. But that requires a transformation, a journey of transformation. I'm going to pass it over to Sinead now so she can introduce herself and start to tell you about this journey, this shift.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, David. So hi, everybody. And as well from me, please, thank you very much, all of you, for taking the time out of your evenings. Luckily, the sun wasn't quite so shiny this evening, certainly where I am. So that's appreciated as well, so that you could make it tonight. So I wanted just to give you a bit of a background as to, I guess, why we're here, what this event was created for, both tonight, the following workshops that we'll be launching from next week, and just generally the Thinking Society. So during 2020 and beyond, I'm sure, like many people, felt a growing feeling, and certainly from my perspective, from a behavioural science perspective, I became really rather concerned with how behavioural science was being used on a population without consent, without governance and without control, so that I would expect to be used as a duty of care to protect anyone that is being involved in any type of experiment, which I've talked about previously. That drove me to reach out to Dan and then ultimately to Panda, where I was involved with in creating a whole nudge series, which was around nudging not to an alternative narrative, which is how it is being generally being used, but to conscious thinking. And this workshop itself has been born out of something evolved from that, but really rather unexpected. So during Donald Trump's inauguration, I make no comment about my position on that because it really doesn't matter, but perhaps unwisely, I found myself on some social media platforms really looking to try and understand the sentiment, what people felt and why they felt it. And I was engaging on two particular sites, which I thought actually would reflect probably my values. One was called Humanists, and although I'm not a humanist myself, in terms of their philosophy of live and let live, I felt that that would be very aligned. And the other one is called Raising Critical Thinkers, which for any parents out there, I would think would be self-explanatory. What I found, however, was not thoughtful discussion at all. It was outrage, echo chambers full of people shouting very loudly and being very angry. And I try to engage genuinely. I try to ask questions. That was inflammatory. It made it worse. And what I hit was a wall, not of any reasoned disagreement necessarily, but of raw and frankly impenetrable emotion. So it was really trying to understand that and understand how we could get past that. Majority of responses were directly at me, and I'm sure everyone that's on this will have experienced that. That seems to be the social media standard nowadays. But there was also one that I remember in particular, because it was short, sweet, some might say, and whilst it was short, it was actually full of logical fallacies. And for those who know what logical fallacies are, they are kind of reasoning that it's used often in propaganda and often in a way to purposely manipulate us. And this was a very short post, but it actually had 5 logical fallacies, which frankly I was incredibly impressed with. But it really struck me that what I was experiencing was not a lack of intelligence. It was a breakdown, frankly, in the most human skills of reasoning, of listening, and of the ability to communicate. And reminiscent of, for any parents out there, toddlers who are acting out because, frankly, they can't make themselves understood because they have neither the language nor the vocabulary or the articulation. And therefore, that results in emotional outbursts. And I feel very strongly that social media has created that context for all of us, frankly. We're overloaded with input. We are reacting, but we are under-equipped with tools to process, to reflect, and to respond in any meaningful and useful way. So I began to ask myself, what could I do about this? And that question led me to reconnect with 2 brilliant people who I've worked with previously, both David Charalambous and Dr. David Thunder. And together, as I said, we've created this workshop series under the Thinking Society. And it's really about importantly, not telling people what to think, but to give people better tools to be able to think, to be able to reason, to be able to talk and to challenge and to listen. It's a space, we hope, that we have created for people who want to be able to take a step back from the noise, from the reactions, and learn how to navigate that world with more clarity and more insight and more strategy in terms of thinking and taking that forward. So thank you for joining us. And we really look forward to all of the conversations. As I said, all of this tonight and also the workshops in the coming weeks have been designed so that there is always a Q&A session so that we can really kind of have meaningful conversations that lead from what's being presented. So what I want to do for the remaining time with the 2 Davids, as I find myself calling them, is to introduce the section that we have on our framework that we've created, which is called Shift. So Shift was really created so that we had something that represents the journey both as an individual, but also in terms of our responsibility as part of a community, as part of society, of how we move usefully with some structure from being able to utilize and develop and hone our skills that allow us to stop, to move through critical thinking and reasoning, to be able to communicate more effectively with people, regardless of the points of views that we come from, to understand the environment and how that impacts everything, and ultimately how we can use those skills to really think and consider the kind of future that we want to build where we can all flourish. So I will hand back to David Charalambous, who will take you through the S of shift.
Thank you, Sinead. Okay, let's take a look at the S, which is to sense. Now, I've been asked the question for the last 5 years, every day and multiple times, and that's, why can I see it? What is it about me that's been able to see through the propaganda, the lies, the nonsense? Now, it's pretty much context. And because what it is that you have different variables in the hidden parts of your mind. So whenever you say a fact, for instance, you know, if somebody sent you a BBC article, you probably wouldn't trust it. Now, if you sent them an alternative media article, they wouldn't trust it. Now, what it is that we have two parts of the brain, which I'm just going to touch on in a minute, where we store so much information. And because you can't see that part of the brain, you're not aware that when you have a different representation to somebody else. And that's what's so key. And when you understand this, you'll stop giving people facts, but you'll start giving them the foundation that makes the fact appear differently. And it's such a critical shift in the way that we look at information. So I say never tell anyone anything, but you can show them. And that's a very subtle point that makes all the difference. Now, it's pretty much like when you see a magic trick and then you know how that trick works, you don't fall for that trick anymore. But until you can see that trick, you can't make head nor tail of it. And that's what's going on with the people that are believing what they're seeing on the TV. They still trust state media. They still trust certain institutions that are misleading them. Now, just to touch on those two parts of the brain, now one's the reticular activating system. Now that is like the security guard at the door. He guards or she guards what gets into your engine room of your mind. Now, this is why when you say certain pieces of information, it's been classified in their mind as conspiracy theory or any other ludicrous terms. It doesn't make it into their mind, as does anything that's not on the corporate media. They just won't trust it. So that security guard is stopping that information from getting into their mind. Now, that part of the mind that it needs to get into is known as the adaptive unconscious. And this is the part of the brain that's hidden from us. When I walk down the street, I don't think about how much weight to put on my left and right foot. It just happens automatically. Now, when the information in that part of the brain changes, we change our minds. And that's the part that we need to affect. And we have so much data showing how we can do that. And it's so powerful when you do that, because then people will be able to see. They'll be able to see through that magic trick, and they'll be able to see what's going on. Additionally, which I found quite incredible in my own life, is that because I am aware of how my brain functions at a much better level now than I was previously, I start to see my own flaws, my own habits that I would like to change. And for the first time in my life, I've actually been able to really impact them from understanding how these parts of the brain function. And it's so key. Now, I'm going to share a riddle, and don't worry about getting this wrong, because most people get it wrong. There's a father and a son in a car crash. The father passes away. The son is in the hospital. In walks an old surgeon and says, "That's my son." How is that possible? Okay. Now, if you've heard it before, you obviously know the answer. But the answer is that the surgeon is the mother. And most people don't see that, because your brain was producing a picture of an old surgeon being a man. Now, that's such a startling riddle when people get it wrong initially. And I told that to many doctors who were surgeons, female surgeons, and they got it wrong. So what happens is that so much of our conditioning sits in that adaptive unconscious, that hidden part of our mind. And what's happened is that the behavioral sciences has made a startling leap, like a quantum leap, over the last couple of decades. And they realized that because so much of the data that controls our behavior and our thinking is in a hidden part of the mind, they realized that they couldn't just judge what people said about what they were doing, because a lot of the time they wouldn't know. So they stopped listening to what people said about their behavior, and they started watching what they did. They started measuring it. They did what we call outrospection, where they watch someone's behavior and then they build all these studies to reveal all of this hidden variable nature. Now, there's a document which I would recommend people to have a look at. If you to do an internet search on Mindspace and the government, you'll find a document from the UK government, which is it's produced by the UK Cabinet Office. It identifies 9 key influences on behaviour, and it's given to all the departments to leverage these psychological levers to manipulate and influence the public. This is literally in black and white now. But because they have that data, they're able to influence people without people's knowledge. And this is where we want to level that playing field. When you get that knowledge, when you understand these hidden parts of your brain, you can actually take your mind back from these social engineers. Now, just to touch on a couple of studies, just to reveal how powerful this knowledge is. In a supermarket, in the background, they played French music one day, German music the next day. The sale of French or German wine went up significantly on those days. And it's quite incredible, you know, when you watch the ASH studies where people would actually lie about an answer just to fit in. Okay, so there's the driver, that people will actually be dishonest just not to be kicked out of a group. And of course, there's a rather amusing study that bankers in certain situations are actually less honest than prison inmates. So the Thinking Society, we're looking to give you a torch to see inside that hidden part of the mind, to give you maps and compasses so you can start to navigate this. And of course, talking to someone is like navigating an obstacle course. But previously, where we've had a blindfold on, when that blindfold comes off, you can start to navigate. And just one quick example is, never ask someone that believes a narrative why they believe what they believe, because they actually don't know. It's been conditioned into them. So you're actually going to give them reasons to support their belief when there isn't any. Ask them what they believe and explain it to you, and they realize they probably don't know. So we can stop banging our head against the wall. So to be part of the Thinking Society is to clearly see what others miss in the world and in ourselves, to see what is truly happening. Only then can we move through that fog with poise, clarity, and purpose, creating a society for the people that's crafted by the people. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Dan, I'm going to be taking the H. Thank you. Okay, so H. So H in our hold the space for reflexivity, and H for honest inquiry. So as we start sensing and start understanding and feeling that these things are happening, that there is something going on that is influencing us, manipulating us, we feel that there's a really important point here where we just need to pause. In a world where, particularly now, everything is fast, everything is kind of coming to us at speed, there's constant reaction, there's constant emotion. Pausing is absolutely critical. Holding that space for ourselves means resisting the urge to fix something, to fight it, or to fly away from it. And instead, it gives us the opportunity, just for a moment, to simply notice, to slow that pace. Because when we pause, we begin to observe, and we begin to observe more critically. And observation is that gateway to conscious thought, in moving out of what psychologists call system 1 thinking, which is unconscious processing, which we do all the time. We cannot switch it off. We cannot know it because it is unconscious. And it's thousands and thousands and thousands of decisions our brain is making through the day. Moving from that system 1 processing into what's called system 2 thinking, which is thinking, conscious thought. I am thinking about a problem. I am trying to work out what it is I need to do about that. It is slower, it's more deliberate, it's effortful, but it's where reflection lives. And reflection isn't just about thinking more, it is about thinking differently. In psychology, they use the phrase reflexivity, and it's about asking yourself not just what you think, but why do you think that? What is actually going on that may be influencing you? Where did that belief come? Whose voice is it that you actually have in your head? Is it even yours? And interestingly, even in the banking world, in kind of straightforward project management, reflection is really important. At the end of a big delivery, particularly when it's complex, I will run teams going through lessons learned exercises where they have to go through exactly that. We take time, we pause, we give them space to talk about what went well, what did not go so well, what should we stop, what should we start, how should we do things differently next time. Is that opportunity to go, what do I need to change? And reflection is not just about rushing to kind of resolve the discomfort that we all feel in that space, which is primarily driven by cognitive dissonance, which again, most of you will have heard very much about over the last few years. And I would wager that majority of people here, for perhaps multiple reasons, are and have become, particularly over the last few years, more comfortable than perhaps the average person in the population of being able to stand in that space of cognitive dissonance. Because cognitive dissonance isn't just a thing, it is a physiological reaction. Our heart races, we sweat more. So there are physiological things that make it difficult for us to, problematic for us to stay there. It's a visceral kind of experience. And so we use that as an example in terms of what happened in the population in the UK through 2020, 2021. The UK government used that cognitive dissonance incredibly effectively by creating campaigns with messaging such as stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives. It created a statement which was incredibly powerful to say, well, if I'm a good person, if I'm a caring person, I have to do this. Because otherwise it created a dissonance between me and how I saw myself, how you saw yourselves as good people, caring people, people that had compassion for their fellow kind of citizens, and not following the very clear messaging that the government was kind of messaging through every single media forum. And that was incredibly powerful. We saw the power of it through those years. By framing the non-compliance into you will be endangering lives, you will be killing people, particularly in the kind of killing grannies, which it then continued to escalate because they found it so incredibly powerful. It amplifies that emotional tension, prompting many to change the behaviour that they would otherwise have done to resolve that dissonance. So we have to find ways to feel that dissonance and not resolve it, to stay there on purpose. And Dan, I don't know if you've got that slide with the cartoon to hand just to share the group. Thank you. I'll give everyone a moment to read. So what that beautifully describes to me, because I love cartoons, I think they can say so much more, is actually what a lot of us saw when we were trying to speak to friends and family and trying to talk to them and share information that we were finding, that we really met this barrier of people not wanting to know. And again, it was the dissonance that was creating around and more than that. And again, we go that in a bit more detail in the workshops around the kind of the feeling of responsibility, the feeling of obligation, and feeling of confusion, because there was a lot of confusion going on. People didn't know what the right thing to do was. And in any environment where there is a lot of complexity and a lot of confusion, what we see is that people will go to authority. I don't know what the right thing to do is. If I'm being told what it is, then the worst case is I'm going to be wrong with everyone else. And so there was a mixture of that dissonance, that responsibility, that anxiety, that people really didn't want to have that information. It was complicating their lives and they really didn't want to know anymore. So we ourselves have to, one, be able to feel and pass through that so that we can then challenge that feeling. And there's some great research that shows that when people are experiencing dissonance, the brain regions that kind of recognize conflict will light up. But when they're given space to reflect and to justify their thinking, the stress physiologically reduces in their body and their reasoning improves. So reflection gives us the opportunity to observe that discomfort without needing to resolve it immediately, and then move into honest inquiry, which is an intentional mindset. It's about giving yourself the choice to be curious, to not be defensive, not to immediately react, to ask questions, but not to win arguments. Questions like, what am I missing? Could I be missing anything? What assumptions am I making? What assumptions are they making? What if the opposite was true? What would it take me to change my mind? These aren't just intellectual exercises, they are emotional risks, because every honest inquiry means that it might dismantle your identity, particularly if it's been really heavily ingrained into a narrative, which again is what we saw so beautifully played out, sadly, through 2020, 2021 and through, and as it has moved into other things. We are still seeing this at play, which is why these workshops and this session I think are so valuable. So once you've created that mindset, you can then really apply analysis, because you can be open, you can understand that you need to be curious and alert, and then you can start asking yourself more objective questions, clarifying the questions that you're also trying to answer, which is incredibly important. And I'll give you an example of that. Are masks effective? Well, it depends on what you mean. So it depends on the question. If the question is, are masks effective at stopping viruses? The answer is no. But if you ask, are masks effective at creating conformity, making statements of fear, then yes, they were very effective. So we really need to think about the questions as well, scrutinize the assumptions and biases from both sides, from all sides, assess the evidence. So we look at data, we look at sources, we look at opinions, we look at examples. We looked to improve how we identify patterns, how we examine root causes, and how we consider context, because that's really important. So this is how we start building critical thinking, not by being cold or detached, but by engaging with our heart and our head. And we learn not that we can't feel, but that we must be thinking as well as feeling. And that is what the H stands for. Thank you. I shall now pass on to David Thunder for the I.
Thank you, Sinead. Basically, we're taking this journey, right? We're taking a journey, a transformative journey, because we sense that there is something not right about the way our society is structured, the way it functions. And logic is not enough to get there, to get us to a better society, to get us to a freer society. And logic is not enough, because imagination basically frames our whole way of seeing the world. So think of the images that are salient for you in a meaningful life. What do you think of when you think of a free community? What do you think of when you think of order? Does the idea of an orderly community or public order conjure up for you the image of a police officer? Well, that's imagination. Or do you think of a jazz festival when you think of order? If you don't free the mind, you will never be truly free, right? And if you don't free your imagination, or feel free to expand your imagination and learn to expand it, if we don't, all of us, we need to learn to expand our imagination, because without a leap of imagination, we cannot move beyond the current paradigm, the current system that we live in. Without imagination, without the ability to imagine a better world, a different world, we'll just end up tinkering with the world we live in, tinkering with the institutions. Maybe we'll, for example, say, okay, I just want to get, a smart politician who's more or less shares my values to the top. I get that politician into power, and then that politician will kind of fix the system for me, or, will improve public policy and so on. And that would be a mistake. I mean, as a short-term solution, maybe electing a populist to power, or, someone who can appeal to the people and is intelligent, maybe it would work for certain issues. But if the problem is systemic, as I would suggest to you, and you'll have to think this through for yourself, obviously, but I'm going to propose that the problem is systemic. And if the problem is systemic with our political system, then putting a new person on the top of the system, chopping off the head and putting a new head in place, is not going to fix our problems. Now, the imagination can be hijacked in different ways. And my colleagues have spoken to you about different forms of manipulation and conditioning. But in my studies, what I've found is that the legitimating ideology of the modern state and the imagery surrounding the state has dominated our imagination and has preempted our ability to think of other possibilities. For example, the myth of the social contract. So there's this idea that we somehow authorized a parliament, we authorized a political system and a government to take care of public order and to, represent our interests. So my question about that is, when did I sign this contract? Who offered me the contract, and when did I sign on the dotted line? I didn't sign the contract, and none of my friends, as far as I know, actually signed this social contract to basically empower an incredibly powerful central government to manage the affairs of my nation. And the second aspect of this ideology of the state, which is deeply problematic, is this idea that a centralized state is the only way to avoid chaos. That if we don't, give sovereignty to the parliament, if we don't give a kind of all-purpose general power to the government over a nation, then we'll just fall into chaos and anarchy. Our society will just fall apart. And that's, for hundreds of years, we've been told this by philosophers, by politicians, in one way or another, it's been in the air. But the fact of the matter is, there are other possibilities. There are systems that are not centralized and are not statist historically. And I'll give you an example. The Hanseatic League, a league of merchant cities in the north of Europe, from around the 13th to 16th century, was a very stable alliance, and it was not a state. It was a league of cities. Another example, the Swiss Confederation is a bunch of regional units, regional political units that basically together govern through a federal government without creating a hyper-centralized state. So the myth of the social contract that authorizes this centralized state is simply false, and yet it shapes our imagination in so many ways. So what's wrong with this myth, and what's wrong with the imagination and the idea, the image of the overarching state that we have? Well, this ideology is dominated by enslaving, hierarchical and technocratic models of order and governance. It licenses, once you have the idea, once you accept the idea of this kind of overarching supervisory organ for society, you're licensing things like 15-minute cities, the micromanagement of universities, the micromanagement of farming methods, and so on. Many, many intrusive kind of regulations over society. So the way I see it is, we have civil society and businesses and organizations, and they have their internal governance structures. And then we have this superstructure of the state with, and sometimes it's municipal governance as well, with intrusive regulations that in many cases disable local associations from working properly and from actually regulating themselves efficiently. So just to give you a little kind of humorous example, some friends of mine who are farmers, and basically, they told me that they have to locate their sheep at every moment. They have to have a geolocation for their sheep at every moment because of a directive from Europe and from the Spanish state. It sounds like the kind of thing that would come from Europe, but anyway. And I asked my friend, okay, so how does that help you be a better farmer? And he said, it doesn't help me be a better farmer. It doesn't help me do a better job or produce better food or anything like that. It's just, I have to do it because I have to be compliant. So I could give you so many examples, but I don't have time, of these kinds of hyper-regulation, intrusive regulations that are really coming from a bureaucracy that doesn't really know what's going on the ground. Now, is there an alternative to the hierarchical top-down state? Yes, there is. The polycentric bottom-up republic. This comes from my book, The Polycentric Republic. I'm basing it on that. You don't have to agree with it, but just hear me out. I'll just lay out a few ideas. First, you have the idea of a league of independent cities with a largely self-regulating civil society. So a lot of autonomy in civil society organizations, associations, churches, and so on, to run their own affairs. Political structures are federated through pacts, and so different cities and regions can actually pact into a shared constitutional order with a minimal overarching constitution. There's political mobility in which citizens can move around between different cities and regions and kind of shop around for a better political arrangement. And this creates a competitive environment in which taxes become more competitive, for example. And it empowers citizens through bottom-up and horizontal approaches to problem solving and governance. So I'm just going to give a few examples. So there's an article called Patterns of Metropolitan Policing by Eleanor Ostrom, and Parks and Whitaker. And they conducted a study of 80 metropolitan areas in the US and found that smaller decentralized police departments were more effective and responsive to community interests compared to large centralized forces. And this was challenged and basically really challenged in a serious way the prevailing idea that if we consolidate and centralize, we'll get more efficiency. No, that was the prevailing idea. And this study really sort of took that apart and showed that it was false. Now, I guess I'm going to stop there because my time is running short, and just say that imagination is not enough. It's important, but it's not enough. We need to bring it down to earth. We need to forge a plan of action. So I'll pass it over to my colleague, Sinead.
Beautifully intro there, David. It was like we'd rehearsed. Thank you. Okay, so the F in our shift is for Forge, and it is absolutely that. It's about all of this great thinking, and we have to actually use it practically. So what do we do with everything that we've seen, that we've felt, that we've thought, and that we've questioned? Because ideas are only potential, and so therefore we have to make plans, and they have to be plans that we're actually going to enact so that they do translate into something, into progress, into change, either at an individual level, community level, or wider. And the behavioural literature makes something very clear. Insights alone do not lead to action. There's some great research for anyone who is interested on, people may already be aware of it, around what's called implementation intentions. Researcher Peter Goldwitzer did some really good work on how we can very simply change how we think about things so that they are more likely to actually be achieved, that we are more likely to enact them. So it is not simply enough to want to do something. So instead of saying to myself, I need to speak more, up more, we create the context and the frame for that to say, when I feel myself hesitating, or when I'm in this situation, I will do this, I will say this, I will count to 3, space, breathe, and then say that. And we can use that structure in small ways and in far larger ways to bridge that gap between what we intend to do and what we will actually do. But of course, it's a balancing act, because if our plan is too idealistic, it will crumble under reality, and we will just get ourselves back under the duvet. And I'm sure we've all had that feeling. But if it's too pragmatic, then it kind of loses energy before it starts, because it doesn't have any vision. So it's about getting that balance, and how do we design something that's both realistic and motivating. One method, again, that we'll spend a bit more time in detail working through is called backcasting, which is round, and it's actually something we take from sustainability planning and environment planning, which is where you look at the vision. So again, which is why David talked about the vision earlier. We talk about and think about the vision that we want to create, the future that we want, and then we reverse engineer the conditions that we will have taken to have gotten there. And we might break that down into, what must happen in the next year, in the next 6 months, in the next day, in the next week, whatever, sometimes in the next hour, if that is what is necessary to move us from kind of inertia into something that we can feel like we've achieved. So we hold the idealism, but we move it, and we structure it around with pragmatic creativity, utilizing the imagination, and the thought to create kind of a visionary realism, which is what we're after, so that everyone feels motivated. And also, I think it's about thinking about who else we can bring on that journey, because We don't necessarily want to do these things on alone. This is one of the reasons that I created this event, and the reason that I didn't want to do it on my own. I wanted to include other people that had different perspectives, different experiences than me, because I think that that adds value for everybody. And there was a really interesting 2020 study in the Journal of Organizational Behavior, which illustrates absolutely that. It found that teams that shared an authorship of goals, so they really felt all connected to those goals across all disciplines and perspectives and ideological differences, so the real kind of true meaning of diversity, achieved far better outcomes and were more likely to sustain the motivation throughout the plan. So forging the kind of plan of action is not just about the end of thinking, it's a maturing of that, so that you are moving into something which is actually expressing your thoughts and your ideas. And I will leave it at that for the moment, and then pass back to both Davids, who are then going to complete shift by taking you through what we feel transform means for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sinead. Okay, I'm going to address personal transformation, and then David's going to talk about societal. So, as I touched on earlier, one of the the most fascinating things of my journey in the last 5 years, and I journeyed sort of over 20 years before then, but sort of need is the mother of invention, as it were, is that I've really delved into much more of how I function, much more why I do what I do, my behaviors. And it's really got me interested in psychology in the first place, over 25 years ago. And over the last year, I've actually answered questions that I had for 25 years that I couldn't answer. And I've managed to change things about myself and my behavior, which have really been very satisfying, that I'd spent so long not succeeding at doing. Now, it's a lot of the time it's because of our conditioning, our education. So many of the things that we believe are literally put there before we're aware. And there's obviously some very famous quotes. I think one of the Jesuits that said, "Give me a boy of 6 and I'll show you the man." So many of our habits aren't really us. They've just come from what we've been told or led to believe. And pretty much everyone here has probably gone through a real stage of unraveling and changing so many of their beliefs about the world. There's a very fascinating fable around conditioning, and it says, how do you control a young elephant? You tie a rope around its neck, and you tie that rope to a tree, and it won't be able to move because it won't have the strength to break the rope or the tree. And then how do you control an old elephant? Well, you just need to tie a rope around its neck. It has already worked out the sphere of how far it can walk, and it won't go beyond those boundaries because those invisible boundaries become its prison. Now, I presented a live workshop on Wednesday, and in the UK, we have advertising the same as everywhere else, but I said to the whole audience, I just announced, have a break, and then paused, and the whole audience responded, have a Kit Kat. Now, that's a advert that goes on the UK to sell a chocolate bar, but everyone in the audience knew what that was and straight away said it, just showing how easy it is to condition ideas into people's minds. Now, 75% of the population experience some degree of fear or anxiety about public speaking. Think about that. We've been, 3/4 of us have been conditioned not to speak out in public. And that's how the very people that have educated us not to speak up against them. And it's quite incredible because it's actually a greater fear than death for most people. Now, there's another very fascinating series of studies where they looked at wealthy children and children from less wealthy families. And it turned out that it was to do with the conditioning. It was nothing to do with genes or anything else. It was that when they were children, they were told that breaking the rules, the school system instilled in them that breaking the rules was immoral. So when a wealthy kid broke the rules, if it didn't harm anyone, they got confidence. They wouldn't wear a school uniform, etc. But when the less wealthy kids broke the rules, they felt immoral. And that's why so many people feel bad or feel that they're not good enough. These aren't true statements, but they sit in that hidden part of the mind and they govern our behavior beyond our awareness. Now, there's been so much conditioning of the public over the last 5 years via carrots and sticks. You know, get a kebab if you get a medical procedure, and if you don't, you're not allowed to go out. And in some places, you couldn't even shop if you didn't comply. You know, and it's becoming very heavy-handed. But see, the personal transformation is so important, because if I want to speak up, I need to have the confidence and power within myself to do so. And everyone has that. And if you feel that anxiety, that's the condition, and that can be conditioned out of us. So our conditioning has created this invisible prison for the mind, and it's invisible, and you can't escape from a prison you can't see. But so many exercises we have now, so many techniques to actually find those prison bars, and then we can transform them and remove them. So we can recondition ourselves, we can break through these, and we can learn to communicate with others, and we can learn to show them. You can't tell people anything, because a statement has so much context around it. But when you learn to have the confidence to show them, that's when people can really change. And that's when we can change our story and change the story for our societies. And on that note, I'm going to pass over to David Thunder.
Thanks, David. So David talked a bit about the importance of personal transformation, the fact that, you know, change starts with me and with you. Meaningful and lasting change usually begins small with you and me and our community. This workshop is about transforming our minds and imagination. And I believe that that is where our change begins. It begins on the inside. Local communities are also seedbeds of change. However, there's a strong bias towards national politics and the state. There's this idea that change, meaningful change, can only occur on a large scale. It's sort of the idea that if I only change my immediate circle of friends, or I only have a positive influence in my neighborhood, then somehow that's not even worth mentioning. It's second rate. It's second rate change. But I think that this is too quick. I think that we're too quick to look down our noses at local, well, I say we, a lot of people in society, to look down our noses at local change and local politics and the ability to just get things done at the local level and improve the education of our own children. What could be more important? So local change is intrinsically valuable if we care about the people around us, right? Even if we don't change the government, if we can change something about our local community, that's important. And I would also suggest that new models can emerge from local change, models that serve as beacons or prototypes for broader societal change. Think about something like early Christianity, right? The first Christians, whether you're Christian or not, whether you agree with the church or have faith or not, think about how extraordinary it is that a small religious group, religious movement, a very tiny religious movement in the backwaters of the Roman Empire, basically completely transformed the way the world thinks, the way a large part of the world thinks. And even secular people who are now consider themselves secular use Christian categories like mercy and compassion for the poor. They use categories that really emerged largely through the Christianity. So that's an example of a very, very small local change becoming systemic. But then we could go to less dramatic examples, like think about homeschooling movements. You know, people who just are not happy with the public school system, they get together with other parents and they set up a really tiny homeschooling movement. It just grows up and expands, and it becomes a nationwide movement or a very large movement. And you could go on and on. There are plenty of other examples of initiatives that can spring up locally and become kind of beacons for larger systemic change. So I think that we're now going to move on to the takeaways from, I don't know who's going to come next. Next, is it Sinead, or I think Dan knows who's coming next.
Yeah, we're going to have everyone back on stage now just to give your key takeaways. So I'll bring you up now, Sinead and David.
Are we there?
Yes, you're here. Yeah, key takeaways from your framework.
Shall I start?
Yeah, you go ahead, Sinead.
Okay, so mine really is think. So think, I think, is the absolute board. It's the thinking so that you become aware of, so you can identify what's happening to you, so you can bring it into that system two thinking, and it allows you then, whatever process you use to kind of apply critical thinking, which will have a more analytical process, you can't hope to start doing that until you've actually brought yourself into conscious thinking. So for me, that is the kind of critical moment to become aware, to think consciously, system two, so that you can see what's happening and then apply some reasoned approach to really consider, you know, why it makes you feel that way. What does it mean? What's your position? What are your values? What do you actually, you know, what do you want to think about that thing?
Thank you, Sinead. I'll come to David
For
Sherrill-Lambos.
me is kind of like a real high level summary. Thank you.
Yeah, so if we keep doing what we've been doing, we'll keep getting what we've been getting. Now, I asked a question in a number of presentations, and it's, how effective has sharing facts been? And people just laugh, okay? But people keep doing it, okay? So what it is, we've got to learn how to communicate. And if something's not working, we change ourselves. And that's the power of conditioning, which is the brain is very malleable. We can change our behaviors at any point. And when we do that, we will change very quickly.
Thank you, David. And finally, David Thunder.
Yeah, I think what I would say is my takeaway here that I'd like to offer, one of my takeaways is that the greatest power someone can have over you is to stop you imagining a world in which you are free. So I just invite you to consider whether your own story about yourself and your society is a story that holds you back or holds me back from believing in our own freedom, or a story that opens up liberating possibilities for me and my community. Is it a story that paints us as helpless victims of big government? Or a story that paints us as entrepreneurs who can create something new and exciting, harnessing our relationships and social capital in creative ways? Back to Dan.
Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to join you on the screen now, and as we move into the next part of the session. So tonight's been a very fascinating exploration of some key concepts, and the shift framework has helped me to understand how the pieces actually intersect between how we see the world, the forces beyond our control, but also some of the things that we can do to take the agency back, and how that then overlays with societal models for change. So I'm going to take us through to the next stage of the discussion. So as Sinead talked about earlier today, and I'm just going to say thank you to our co-host for the minute as I take this forward for the next piece. As Sinead talked about earlier today, we've got a continuance view from this discussion. So Sinead founded this faculty with the goal to really lead the return to sanity and help people to understand how people are being manipulated, how the societal factors are actually contributing to the way that the media ecosystem is manifesting. So we're looking at all of the different systemic structures, but also how we interact with the world around us. So with that vision, she's developed a program called the Thinking Society, and I'm going to take you through that now. Before we go through to the Q&A. So if you're interested in learning more about the concepts that we've discussed tonight, which really in the space of an hour, we've got a really high level overview of everything from some behavioral techniques to psychological principles, but also points of interaction and communication between ourselves. There's been a real rich discussion, but obviously there's only so much you can cover in 60 minutes. So we want to introduce you to the Thinking Society workshop series tonight that Sinead has touched upon, which is a 6-part live transformation course to help you think critically, act consciously, and break through the conformity that we witness in the outside world. Staged over 6 workshops, we're going to go deeper into each of the things that we talked about tonight, and I'm going to walk you through what some of those things include. But what we're intending to put together and elevate our role within this is to help facilitate this. We've built the platform to host the materials. We're really creating a space where people like you and I can learn and interact with really important breaking wisdom, really, in terms of, or breaking knowledge overlaid with wisdom, so that we can actually put this into action in the real world. So what we'll experience through this course, number one, is understand how thought is shaped by media, institutions, and culture, as we've touched upon tonight. Sharpen your critical faculties to discern truth from manipulation, and that's becoming increasingly challenging with deep fakes and AI. Breaking free from conformity and groupthink and understanding how those mechanisms work in order to create mass formation is something that Matthias Desmet has also spoken about. exploring bold alternatives to broken systems, as David has started to introduce tonight, Dr. David Thunder, but also to be part of a community of free, discerning minds who are committed to building a better future. So this is what our overarching principle is for the program, delivered over 6 workshops over 6 weeks. So full 90-minute workshops over 6 weeks. The first section is to take back control of your mind, which is exploring how your thoughts are shaped consciously and unconsciously, and how to break free from the mental autopilot, the emotional reactivity that we see in the social media world, and the unconscious biases that can shape our reason. So you can begin to start to think critically again, but also understand how the unconscious forces are working and how they can be impacted by outside manipulation or propaganda, so you can really take back control. That's the first week. And the second week is really designed to help us question everything we thought we knew, to discover how our upbringing, how media, how culture shapes our thinking, and how to reclaim ownership, not over our thoughts, but over what we believe about ourselves and the world, so we can build a foundation for independent and conscious thought. Week 3 looks at how the systems shape us. And again, this is what is particularly unique about what we do here, is we don't just look at the individual factors, we look at how the world around us intersects with us. So we'll look at how the modern centralized authoritarian structures suppress independent thought and how to break free, and start to lay the groundwork of what change could look like in that space. Looking then at week 4, we're going to look at the age of nudge, moving into some of the behavioral science pieces that Shanae talked about tonight, from subtle messaging to full-blown propaganda. We're constantly being nudged, and what we want to understand is those tools of persuasion, so we can actually unlock them in real time to see how they're being used in media, government, and tech. So you've got the tools to stay conscious when others are still being nudged around you. So you can actually not only call out the narratives, but also understand the mechanisms that are being used to create the narratives. Then, to build on the work in module 3, and to build on what David's talked about tonight, we're going to look at how we can rethink society from the bottom up, exploring the question, what does a truly free and flourishing society look like? We'll explore real models of decentralized, resilient communities, the polycentric republic that David's talked about today, really informed by his thesis, and how you can begin to participate in systems that empower rather than control. Because it's one thing having the imagination to see different forms of structure, but it's another than having the direct inspiration to then go ahead and contribute to the change we want to see. Because awareness is one thing, but action is the next. And this is where the course really brings it together, so you can find your role in not only rethinking society, but actually helping to reshape it. And then number 6, how to become the free thinker that the world needs. We'll close by looking at how nonconformists are essential to rebuilding a flourishing world, and how you can step into your own role as a courageous, critical mind. So it draws together everything from the previous 6 weeks, so that we can actually move forward to lead the return to sanity. So you'll have the tools you need to understand what's happening in the world. You'll have the tools to deepen your critical thinking, so you can think clearly and confidently, a personal practice for critical thinking, so you'll actually have practical skills that you can deploy. You'll have tools for spotting manipulation, so you can stay grounded, so you don't become immediately drawn into the outrage cycles that are so pervasive in social media, developing the mental tools and mental models to discern the truth, challenge dominant narratives, but also to constructively and carefully debate others in a very respectful, empathetic way. Not only that, we'll look at different frameworks for flourishing communities and alternatives that you can play a part in. And ultimately, alongside this workshop, you'll form a great community of free minds who are not only asking questions, but actively seeking to make a difference in the world around them. So who's the workshop series for? Well, if you feel disillusioned by the state of the world, but not defeated, you're not willing to let things slide, you're not willing to let the society crumble, you still feel a sense of hope and optimism and possibility, well, this is definitely for you. If you're tired of shallow social media debates and witnessing psychological manipulation, then this is your chance to understand how we can actually begin an age of reason again, and stimulate open and active debate, and break through some of those narratives and manipulative techniques. Some of you may have already stepped back from the noise. You're fed up with the social media systems right now because they're just so negative, so depressing, but you still want to stay informed and ultimately you want to make a difference, then this is definitely for you. And if you're looking for tools, language, and frameworks to overlay around your own critical thinking to give you the understanding of why it is you're coming to the conclusions that you are and why others are coming to different conclusions, then this course is going to help you to have those mental models, but also be around like minds who are exploring these issues together, because ultimately shared sense making is the key. And lastly, if you believe in freedom, clarity, and the power of shared sense making, then this is a great space for you. So what's going to be included in the 6-week series? Access to the 6 live course modules, which begin this time next week, Thursday, the 22nd of May at 7:30 p.m. We'll be live 6 weeks in a row, and watch this space. We may have a bonus 7th session with a very special external guest, which we'll announce in the next couple of days. You'll have full access to all of the recordings, the replays, the video, the audio, and the transcripts. There'll be live Q&A within each of the sessions with the faculty that you've met tonight, and any downloadable resources and reflection prompts and tools will be included within the membership vault. And as the Thinking Society evolves and develops over time, as a founding member, you will get all future updates included at no additional cost. So you have the opportunity to join the very first cohort as we kick this off next week, the 6-week live course, for a one-time payment of £99. And just to put that into perspective for you, I recently took not recently, about a year or so ago, 18 months ago, I did the Rebel Wisdom. Some of you may know Rebel Wisdom. I did their sense-making course, which is around about a 6-week course. It was a very similar structured course. That was £349 for a 6-week program with live access. And actually, this program will go on sale for £199 once we've done our first cohort. So you get early access at £99 as an initial founding member. We've introduced a 7-day satisfaction guarantee. So if you don't think after the first session that your investment was worthwhile, then you can ask for a refund, no questions asked. But that £99 will cover you for the 6-week course, the online platform, all of the replays, access to the community, live Q&As, to really invest in your future and to give you the skills and tools to navigate this changing time. So if you are ready to go deeper, registration is open now. The first module begins on Thursday, the 22nd of May at 7:30 p.m. next week. And you can register on the link that you used to register for this webinar. It's now switched over to the course. The full breakdown of the course is there. There's a comprehensive overview of everything that we've talked about tonight, what's included, what to expect, all of the key modules, details about our instructors this evening, and some FAQs on there as well. So we really do hope that you will join us to go deeper here. It's a rare opportunity to learn from an incredible faculty who have decades of experience collectively in these areas. And not only do I really believe that these individuals that we've brought together can help you personally and individually on your own journey, I honestly believe that this is a turning point, and that the more people can go through this type of material and deepen their wisdom and knowledge around these types of tools, techniques, and frameworks, then the faster we can move to a well-reasoned, free and flourishing society based on sane principles, which is why I keep talking about the return to sanity begins now. So if you are ready to go deeper and you are ready to play a part in leading the return to sanity, then I encourage you to go weareelevate.org/thinking society. This will be emailed to you with the replay following tonight's session, including the Q&A, which we're going to go into next. And it's my hope that as many of you as possible are able to join us for this first cohort and to really deepen your knowledge at a time where critical thinking is more under threat than ever before, and that free thinking has become a radical act. So if you are looking for the tools and frameworks to shape in your own skill set, then this is the place for you. There's nothing else like this that we can find out there that will give you this type of knowledge and experience from so many well-qualified and well-experienced instructors. So I'm going to hand us back to our faculty now for Q&A. So feel free to ask any questions about the material tonight. There's already some questions there in the Q&A, so we'll pull those up in a moment. If you've got any questions about the course, also feel free to ask your questions about the course. But really excited now to bring our faculty back online to go through our Q&A. So welcome back to Sinead, David, and David. Sinead, would you like to add anything before we bring up our first question, just on what I've shared there about the next steps of the course and why you think this is so important for people right now?
I think you were very comprehensive, Dan. I do think that when we are working really hard to create something which is practical and really does, as I think hopefully the shift shows, it's rather than just telling people information that they may or may not have gleaned and may not. It's actually, how do we use that to actually create something which people can enact on and feel empowered to drive, for themselves, for their communities, for their friends. And also I want to just, I suppose, make the point that this isn't just about you know, the people who were on, and I'm going to use my air quotes here, the right side of the last 5 years. In fact, it's absolutely not that. It's about not having sides at all, and just finding a way to engage and communicate with people that perhaps things have broken down. We've never been at a situation before where we've had so much manipulation, and we really have to find a way as individuals to find a way back. And that's really what I'm hoping that this is some attempt to. It's not going to solve everything. We're just 3 people, but we really hope that, you know, where it's coming from, you know, really kind of has some value to the people that join. And we're really excited about the next 6 weeks.
Thank you. So let's open up with our first question. And again, if you look for the Q&A button in the Zoom room, you'll see the questions. So let's start for the first question. I'll direct this at you, David Cherylambos. Ian asks, I've wondered whether Yuval Harari is actually trying to warn us as it's not the evil person that many think. What do you think? And there's been some comments on that already, but do you have an opinion on that, David?
David C, yeah.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
see, the thing is, from what I've seen him speak, I've seen a lot of ego. So I mean, people would do a lot of things for their 15 minutes of fame. So I don't trust the man. I think that, I mean, so many of them, when you listen to them, the hubris is quite astonishing. I mean, there was one in the WF meeting where they said, us elites are communicating and working together better, but the public trusts us less. And it's like, wow, yeah, we don't trust you because you don't have our interests at heart. So what it is, people's frames in their own mind really governs how they behave. And a lot of these people doing what they're doing, they actually don't think there's anything wrong with it. A lot of these, you know, people on Wall Street that are ripping companies off and making billions doing so, they think it's, you know, greed is good, and they think it's dog eat dog world. And that's such a key point, because this theory of survival of the fittest, one, it doesn't appear to be true. It's survival cooperation. But if it was truly survival of the fittest, everyone would be going around robbing each other. You know, the public would be going, you know, burgling each other all the time. That's not what happens, because it's survival cooperation. And I think Harari, I don't trust him, and I don't think anything that he's said would lead me to think that he can be trusted.
Thanks, David. Any other points of view on that question before I move on to some of the next ones? No, okay, leaving that one. Okay, so there's a couple of practical questions about the course. So many about the actual logistics. So the course begins next Thursday, and it runs every Thursday for 6 weeks. So it's 6 calendar weeks, starting from next Thursday, the 22nd, all the way through to the final date. I don't remember off the top of my memory. Do you remember, Sinead? 22nd, 29th, 5th of June, 12th of June, and then the 19th of June, I think, is the final one. Although the 26th of June, it goes through to the 26th of June, and we may have a final session the week after that, a bonus session. Now, all of the sessions will be recorded. Anyone who's taking part in the course will have full lifetime access to all of the replays, including the Q&A, the transcripts, and any supporting materials will be uploaded to your private membership vault. So I'll show you the membership vault before we log out, so you can actually see and imagine what it will be like to be part of the course, because there's a community discussion feed in there. You'll have all of the course modules in audio and video format with the transcripts. We'll take care of all of that, plus the replays and all the Q&A. So if you can't make a session live, it's okay. You'll have the recordings, and you'll still be able to engage in the discussion. And if you know you're not going to be available for a session and you have a question, you can submit the question to us before the session goes live, and we can make sure your questions are answered before the session takes place. So thank you for those questions. So every Thursday evening for the next 6 weeks, starting next Thursday. So hopefully that makes sense, and you can watch all the recordings, and you have, if you take part in the course, you have lifetime access to those recordings. Okay, so this is another contentious question about viruses and germ theory. So I want to posit this question rather than, you know, we're not in a scientific workshop this evening looking at the specific arguments around terrain theory or germ theory, but I am curious about, from the panel, how you would think about a mental model for assessing these things, because I've had some very interesting discussions on this topic. And I found that a lot of the arguments on both sides end up using logical fallacies to make their point, and therefore you get stuck in this circular argument that can't actually break free from the argument. So I can share more on that another time on the specific arguments, but I'm very interested. Sinead, I'll come to you. I know you've done some work with Panda. Do you have a specific perspective on how a complex debate, like something like terrain theory versus germ theory, how you would approach that from a thinking point of view?
So there's a few layers of this. I'm not sure how long I've got. This is probably a whole session in its right. So I think, first of all, part of what I want to be able to cover in the workshops is actually certainly a level of degree of understanding of literacy around research papers. Because I do believe, I'm not one of these people who goes, you need to be an expert. I think there is lots of things that people as lay people can look at research papers and understand a level of how credible, and of what quality papers are. Now, obviously, I'm not a biologist, a virologist, or any ologist that would be able to have some view in terms of, those two things. But what I can look at is the papers. I can also, I think for me personally, in the journey that I've taken, often when I kind of come across these types of things, I will think an extra layer and just think, does it matter to me? Do I need to have decided one way or the other what it is? So there's the layer of, is the argument credible? Does it stand scientifically? Does it stand logically, which we look at through the critical thinking kind of lenses that we work through? Can I look at the papers and go, are the samples useful sizes? Is the information significant? Has it been researched by independent researchers? Who is funding? All of those things that I think as articulate people we should be able to look at. But then there's a separate secondary question in areas that are certainly outside my area of specialism, where I will take the position of, does it matter to me? So things, there will be other controversial, I won't raise them here because I don't want to go down a kind of an alley. But so in terms, and we do talk as well about, this concept of conspiracy theorists and that, in terms of why is that being used so incredibly successfully, ultimately to kind of close people down. But actually, what does conspiracy theorists, what is it, for us in terms of actually it's people who are inquiring, who want to understand, and how that might be useful. But there is also a point of going, well, actually, I'm never going to know everything. And even when you use any type of critical thinking framework, there's a point where you have to trust. So you have to go, that is a credible source for me. I'm not the expert. I haven't, I don't know the answer to this. I have to take that on trust. And it's a level of, at what point does that make sense to me, based on the actual question itself, in terms of the kind of ramifications of making that decision, but also understanding that you're making that decision based on a level of not understanding, and that might be okay too.
Yeah, David Sharon-Lambert, I'd like to ask you a piece about this as well, without going into the specifics of the actual question again, because I think you may have been involved in we actually did try to facilitate a debate on this question of germ theory versus terrain theory. But it never happened because the terrain theory cohort refused to agree to the terms of the debate in order to create an debate that the material could actually be discussed on the same level. How important is it, David, in a debate type environment to be able to agree upon the terms of discussion in advance so that people are aware of how the discussion will take place?
Yeah, it's really important. Touching on Sinead's trust, because it is key, because since the dawn of time we've had to trust people more wise than us in certain areas. So I tried to fix something in my car last year and I completely destroyed the immobilizer, and I needed to, so I didn't know what I was doing, and I cocked up. I do know a number and spoken to a number of experts on both sides of that debate, and they both made compelling arguments. And so I lean more towards terrain theory as being important for health, but at the same time I know that if someone cut their hand open and didn't cover it up and walked around and touched all the dirt and everything else, they're probably going to get an infection. So there's lots of data. I think what's really important is not to identify it with one side of the argument, because all the studies show that once you've done that, what happens is it's called a polarization of beliefs. It's actually, the polarity of beliefs, that they had I think it was gun control was one of the examples. So they had both ends of the spectrum. They had their arguments very well articulated to the other side, and then you'd expect that they might come a bit closer to the middle. In fact, what happened, they moved further apart. So a big part of this is that once we believe a certain position, then we're going to see all the information that supports that, and we're going to ignore the information that doesn't. And that doesn't happen consciously for the most part. So it's really important not to get stuck in a position, but to be stuck in a principle. So what is it I want? If I want good health, what do I need to do? If I want good society, what do I need to do? The labels are the thing that often causes us the problem. And that's why conspiracy theories, that label is so effective, because it allows the person not to think deeply about the information that we're saying. It's a cognitive dissonance management thing. So it's really key. Coming back to that viruses or not, yeah, I was almost involved in that session with you to look at that. But I think what's really important is to say, I don't know. It's really important. I haven't looked enough into the details. From what I've seen, both sides are making very compelling arguments, but we've been educated so much to think we need to know the answer. And that prevents creativity. That prevents us really looking. So then we fall on one side of the debate, and from there, that's it. The same with political parties. Most people do not change. Okay, so it's really important not to be solid.
Thank you. And David Thunder, I'll ask you a final question here. It's been answered in the chat, but there's a question around how can we bring along friends to the course who we love and think may be influenced by the mainstream narratives, but may think of people on this call as a conspiracy theorist. How do we move the conversation of free thinking, and how do we invite people outside of our potential cohort to something like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think friendship is an important element because trust is arises out of affection and respect. And so even I think friendship, what is friendship? I mean, friendship is being open to the other person, interested in the other person, and certainly not going in a proselytizing attitude, to be going in and say, I'm going to get my friend to come and I'm going to tell them why they need to change their ways. I find in my experience that's not very effective. So, I mean, my suggestion is just common sense. It's just, well, first of all, try to understand, what do they actually think, I mean, take an interest in them, maybe go to watch a game of football with them or something on the TV or, and it'll come and stuff will come up. But they have to see you in a context where you're not just pushing a line, you know what I mean? Because otherwise they just politicize the relationship. So in that sense, I mean, I think you might, sometimes people say, well, have you ever wondered, about something, or just planting a seed in someone's mind? But yeah, I think in my experience, it's more people who are already somewhat sympathetic and see something in you. And so if you have friends, I think that's friendship is ultimately the answer, even collegial friendship.
Thank you, David. That's a powerful answer. And the old adage of seek first to understand before being understood is a classic example from Dr. Stephen Covey, actually. So, first try and understand someone else's perspective before putting yours across. And often the invitation will come forward. But I'll add a few thoughts on inviting others to a conversation like this. And again, my own experience of a similar course, as I mentioned, I participated in the Rebel Wisdom course, which was a shared sense-making course, which covered some of the topics that we're covering in the Thinking Society, but wasn't necessarily grounded in the external change part, although it does link to that. But because of their diverse audience base, there was a lot of people on the call who had very divergent viewpoints. But the whole purpose of the sessions was actually to bring together a space where we could collectively sense make together. And as a result of that shared sense making, we can come to different understandings, and our positions may or may not change, but at least we have a deeper understanding of one another. And my observation of the world right now is everyone thinks they're a critical thinker, but they can completely see the world completely differently. So I would say that the invitation for people to join this is really to understand how the media ecosystem is affecting us and how we can navigate that, to understand how propaganda is used, to understand how behavioral techniques are used, And then each individual can use that in their own selective interpretation. So the course isn't designed to share a particular point of view or perspective. That's why I position the question around viruses and terrain theory in a specific way, because that's not the debate that we're here to have, but we're actually here to understand the tools so that we can critically analyze any set of arguments, but also to have a discussion, debate in a healthy way, and then also understand how that connects to a wider society that we want to create. So I think there is a lot of space within what we're creating here, and I think David and Sinead would echo this: is that the course isn't for people who see the world just one way, because we end up creating our own echo chamber. What we want to do is create tools and principles to help people to navigate this together. Because I can guarantee you, if you had two polarizing viewpoints join this course and they participate fully for the full 6 weeks, by the end of the 6-week process, I can guarantee you they'll be able to have a deeper, more empathetic, more reasoned discussion that would help each party better understand their perspectives, even if they don't change. And the perspective shift isn't necessarily the desired goal. It's actually to develop shared understanding so we can each move closer to truth. So, Sinead, would you have a point to say on that in terms of the wider application of this course to different cohorts?
Yeah, I mean, I would just reiterate exactly what you said, but also I think humility is something which I think is an absolutely critical word, and what that means, and speaking as a behavioral scientist, I think it's important to say that I think the behavioral scientists were just as nudges as everyone else. I think if you look back and analyze even their behavior during 2020, in particular into 2021, I think, they were as susceptible. And certainly, just because, you might understand these things doesn't mean that you're not going to be influenced unconsciously. I always love having this conversation with somebody early on where I was talking to them in quite passionate about some work that I'd been researching around how to motivate children and teachers. Actually, it was more specifically around teachers to make them get better results from their kids. And so what they did was, like, they had actually told the teachers incorrect information about who was good and who wasn't so good. And what they found was that there was a self-fulfilling prophecy over the 12-month period. And for me, particularly as a parent, I was just like, how this is amazing. I remember speaking to a fellow parent and they were like, oh yeah, no, that's really interesting. Of course, I wouldn't be influenced by that, but I can see how other people would be. And I think it's about having enough humility to know we were all influenced, even those who are on a different side and didn't conform, didn't comply, didn't do those things. We were also exhibiting the kind of being influenced. We all also kind of created our group identity, and that identity became us, and then it influences how we think, what we say, what we feel, and what we do. And I think it's about having that process all the way through. And as you said, it's not about the actual kind of positions that anybody has in anything. It's about trying to find an approach where we can, as a group of whole society, work to that future and find that compromise and because we are, and it's kind of that phrase, we are better together. And it's about having those when lots of us have lost people along the way, and maybe they're people we want to get back, maybe they're not, maybe we have people in the future that we want to kind of engage with. But I think it's about understanding those tools and trying to have them so that we can better understand what's going on in our environment and engage in a way which stops this polarization, because that's just bad for everybody, regardless of what side of that polar you are on.
Yes, thank you, Sinead. So I'm going to draw us to a close now. Thank you for your questions in the chat there. That's been a stimulating discussion. Again, there's a couple of admin questions, so I'm going to recap a couple of points for you now with the final slide. So we've got the course beginning next week now, 22nd of May, 7:30 p.m. through to Thursday, the 26th of June, 7:30 p.m. Each module will be 90 minutes long, so that's the time investment of your time. And you can join now at weareelevate.org/thinking society. So registration is now open. It's a 6-week program. All the replays are included if you can't make it live, and you can submit your questions in advance, and you have lifetime access to the materials. Now, I want to come back to the screen and close with a final thought, which is this: the world around us is changing rapidly, and many of us are concerned about the state of reality, and many of us have come from the last few years really questioning narratives and becoming concerned about the erosion of truth and the erosion of a shared sense of standards and values and principles with a overlay of integrity. There is so much information in the world right now. We're actually drowning in information. Knowledge is freely available everywhere, and people are now saying in the world of AI, knowledge itself, the value of knowledge goes to zero. But what this brings is deep practice. You're working with a faculty of people who have spent their professional careers understanding this material and disseminating it in a way that makes it accessible to you. So yes, it's true, you could go and spend the next 6 weeks doing your own research and learning all these principles, but nothing beats the hard-earned practice of actually studying this, deploying this, researching it, implementing it. So by taking part in this course, you're immersing yourself in a learning environment that will deepen not only your understanding, but will lead to wisdom so that you can practically apply the tools that you're learning. And it's going to give you the edge in your own life. It's going to help you have better conversations, and it's going to equip you with the tools to help lead the return to sanity. So I hope you found tonight's session very valuable. We will be getting the replay from tonight's session in the morning tomorrow with the links from the chat. And you'll receive this evening the link to join the course with a little bit more information about the next steps and the dates. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our faculty. Please do join us over at weareelevate.org/thinking society if you would like to begin with us next week. And let this be the return to sanity and pursuing those free and flourishing societies that many of us here dream of creating in our lifetime. So thank you to Sinead for pulling this together. Thank you to Dr. David Thunder, and thank you to David Charalambos, and thank you to each one of you who watched with us live this evening and for being with us all the way through for this incredible 90-minute session. And we do hope you will join us inside the Thinking Society as we move towards a free and flourishing society.